Dan, walk us through how the Israeli public has responded to the U.S. military intervention over the weekend.
Good morning, Jumana. Yes, well, this was a dramatic weekend, one of historic proportions in Israel as elsewhere in the region and in the world, especially countries that have a stake in this part of the world. And Israelis, I would say, this is to judge by everything from television panelists to the people I've shared bomb shelters with during Iranian retaliatory missile attacks, appear to be relieved, jubilant, astonished at the fact that the world's great power, the United States, did intervene finally, and using its firepower for what appears to have been a knockout blow, at least as described by President Trump and by his staff, to the Iranian nuclear program. Of course, the question is whether it was a knockout blow. And I think what you're going to see today is the discourse shifting to one of BDA. That's a refrain you'll be hearing a lot of, battle damage assessment, whether indeed it was a knockout blow, whether indeed the damage was enough to end any credible work at those sites and effectively allow Israel to pack up and say that the war is over. The main threat, what it's described as the main threat to its existence going back 30 decades, has now been dealt with conclusively.
I thought it was interesting, the Israeli Prime Minister gave a televised address yesterday where he said Israel is very close to reaching goals in Iran, but will also avoid a war of attrition. How should we be reading those comments, Dan?
Well, it's worth keeping in mind that the countries are separated by something like 1,000 miles of territory, I think 3 international borders. Iran is something like 70 times the size of Israel. There really is an asymmetry here in terms of disposition, geography, military standing. So for all the virtuosity of Israeli forces here, I don't think they could afford to sustain fighting in the long run, something akin to what we've seen in the last 20 months in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, which are neighboring countries or neighboring territories. So the Israelis are looking logistically at this. I think they're also signaling to the American public, those Americans who are wondering whether this is a repeat of 2003 in Iraq, that this was a one-time deal for Israel and for the United States, that perhaps the U.S. role has begun and ended with this airstrike, and that Israel, the country most involved in this, the U.S. ally, is really also trying to wrap things up as soon as it believes that its goals have been achieved, and those goals may be achieved very soon.